Hello, everyone, and welcome to another installment of a very special installment, actually. Excuse me there. A very special installment of our Southern California housing market update. This is for April Fool's Day, though this is no joke, I promise you. My name is Stephen Meade with Domicile Real Estate, where we are on a mission to help California's renters become homeowners. And part of that mission is really kind of taking a look at the news. And I want to take we have our normal stats, we have our slides, we can get into it. But one of the articles that has come out recently is concerning the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas released a report earlier this week talking about signs of a potential housing bubble. And the media generally likes to pick and choose things out of these articles and kind of put their own little spin on them. So we wanted to go direct to the source. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about what the Federal Reserve is saying and why that might be important to you if you're out there as a potential first-time home buyer. So I'm going to pull up that article real quick here. Here we go. This is directly from the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas. Rather than kind of a news article. And I'll kind of go over the gist of what this is and what they're saying. So what they're doing is they are doing real-time market monitoring. And basically what the Fed is saying is they said, after everything that happened in the early 2000s, we think part of our job is to keep an eye on housing statistics to let policymakers and legislators know kind of what's happening in an attempt to, possibly shape policy to prevent that kind of a housing bubble going on. One of the things that they talk about, and I think there is a realness to this, is this notion that if people are continuously buying, essentially on some form of speculation, whether that's they think they're going to get rich speculation, which is what investors tend to do, or they think they're going to miss out and never be able to buy a house. Speculation, meaning that it's not just that they don't think they're going to be able to buy a house, it's that they don't think they're going to be able to buy a house and they're willing to overpay for a house today to lock something in so they don't have to worry about it. And by overpay, meaning they will make a decision that people will routinely make a decision that is not necessarily a smart financial move based on the numbers today, but they're basing it purely on their hopes and dreams for tomorrow. And the Fed is concerned that that might be happening. And what they do is they produce some of these really cool charts here to kind of talk about that. And what I'm going to do here, they use the term exuberance. I think that might be maybe not the word I would choose in this particular moment, but we'll say irrational buying behavior. So I brought this up a little bit bigger. And what they're actually trying to do with this chart is that they are trying to map where real housing prices are. And by real housing, they are factoring in inflation. They're trying to benchmark real housing versus where they think it should be. So if you look back over time since the early 80s, housing was essentially underpriced, and through 1988 and 91, it was a little bit overpriced, and it was underpriced again through the 90s. Then it turned to the 2000s, and you see what's happening here. Across 2000, moderately overpriced, then up through 2003, way overpriced. Then it crashed down here, and for a while it was underpriced, and then it started climbing again through around 2018, where it was a little overpriced, and then it has shot up since the pandemic time period. So they're trying to show in a chart here that kind of housing through history, versus where we think housing should be, where did it actually go? That's what they're trying to draw with these lines. So let me get out of that one. And then their second measurement is, and I think this is an interesting one because this is something I've talked about in the past. This is a chart where they're talking about price to rent. And I actually think they're using the wrong index in a way for a couple reasons. I don't think consumers make decisions this way. And I'm not sure they should make decisions this way. So what they are looking at is they are looking at the price of a home versus the rent. And I think what they should be looking at is the payment on a home at today's prices, incorporating today's interest rates versus the price to rent, because that's the decision that consumers actually face, right? That's the decision that you're facing right now. If you're watching this, you could rent a house for X dollars, or you could go buy a house where you're going to have a payment for Y dollars, and you're going to compare that choice and you're going to try to say, which is more worthwhile for me to do? And I think what might even be a better measurement of that is to kind of get an idea of housing health is, well, how much have rents risen over time versus how much has the payment risen over time? And are those keeping pace, especially in a market like Southern California? So what they're doing with this chart is they're calling it their price to rent ratio, so this raw data, and then they're applying this kind of exuberance indicator, and they're showing back here again, remember 2001, 2003, 2004, 2005, 2006. They're showing how things got completely out of control, then they fell again 2009, 2010, and the zero line is where it's supposed to be according to Fed fundamentals. So that's what the Fed is trying to do. And remember, they're using national data for this. And national data is great, but national data also has some limitations to it, especially if you're in a market that is not what anyone would consider. It's not what you might consider a typical market. So I would say Southern California is not a typical market for a couple reasons. The biggest one is that we are severely supply constricted. This is not Texas. We do not just build out whole new cities out in the middle of nowhere and build cheap houses. So that really doesn't occur here. That's not where the jobs are. And even in a work from home environment, that tends to just not be the pattern that we see in California. So we are a very supply restricted state. We're also a very desirable state. So people are, to be honest, in a lot of ways, willing to put up with a lot to stay here. I don't know a nicer way to put it, but sunshine's free. It's a beautiful day out today. I think most of us are enjoying it if you're out here. So I want to kind of lay the groundwork with this, right? And what the Fed's saying and whether we think that applies and how much of that applies to our market. And I'll be honest, I will tell you that some of that absolutely applies to our market. I think something that we've talked about a lot is, are consumers behaving irrationally? The Fed calls it exuberance. I call it irrational buying behavior. When they're not buying based on the fundamental value of something, but based on what they think it might be. So the Fed and I kind of speak the same language. I don't think, though, and I've run some numbers, and I'll tell you why I don't think that it applies quite as much to Southern California, but there definitely is an element of that here. And I'm going to go into that in detail kind of as we weave through our statistics. So bear with me a minute. Let me bring up the screen share here. Okay, so our first thing is closed prices. And not a huge amount to talk about, but you can see we had our beginning of year, and that really was this accelerated run up in both our entry-level single-family home, which is a 3-bedroom, 2-bath, and our entry-level condo, 2-bedroom, 2-bath. And again, to approximate the entry-level market, this is a first quartile. So it's the median of the median, right? So it's a quarter of the way between the cheapest and the most expensive. Okay, so we've seen this price run-up happen, and you might be thinking this price run-up really is kind of where our trouble is, but it's not. Our trouble, I think, is actually on our next chart right here. So if you look at this chart, let's analyze it for entry-level single-family homes, which I did. We run up the chart here, but we're right around, it actually is right around $5,000 is where our payment is on that entry-level single-family home. And if you remember, to me, what I'm most concerned with is I want to know, have rents kept pace with that? Because that's the choice that you as a consumer out there are making, right? In terms of whether this is. So let's look back here to 2018. So 2018, in June of 2018, the payment on our entry-level single-family home, 3-bedroom, 2-bath, was $3,600 a month. And we actually went back to June of 2018 on the rental side, right? And on the rental side, that was $2,250 was our first quartile 3-bedroom, 2-bath, single family home rent back in June of 2018. So remember that, $2,250. Now, if we fast forward to now at $5,000, what we've seen happen is this is about a 38% increase in the payment. So between June of 2018 and now in 2022, almost 4 years, right? We're a couple months off, almost 4 years, that payment on that entry-level single-family home has gone up by 38%. And what's interesting about that is a good portion of that increase has happened in the last 2 months, or at least a good 10% of that 38% has been in the last 2 months due to rate increases, not due to price increases of the homes, due to rate increases. So remember that it's gone up by 38%. Where do you think the rents are today? And one of the things I want to talk about a little bit, just for a second, a caveat, is that if the rent market is somewhat responsive, right, to the buy market, and I think in California it is, because we are undersupplied on housing. If you're not buying, then you must be renting, right? That data doesn't reflect interest rate increases yet. I bet next month's rental data will show those interest rate increases. So if we look today, right, in the month of March, where were we at in terms of our first quartile rental? We were actually at $2,950. So if you go back there and you say, well, if now the payment to buy is $5,000 a month and it used to be $3,600 back in 2018, that's a 38% increase. What's the increase for rental? Well, if we go take that $2,950 and we divide that by our $2,250 back from 2018, that is a 31% increase. So our housing costs in terms of payment are absolutely outstripping rent, but they're not outstripping rent by a huge and wild amount, at least not yet. And so, you know, the way I look at this is we've had some pretty significant rate increases that are really fueling those monthly payment increases. And what I want to know is if we're in a high inflation environment, so it means if rates hold steady and prices hold steady in a year, rents will have caught up to where that payment is, right? It'll mean the payment hasn't changed and rents have caught up by then if they go up at CPI. So, which is about 8%. So I'm not super worried about the position that we're in. I think the national numbers might actually look a little bit worse than California's numbers, at least Southern California's numbers for this. I definitely see a bit of a premium in the housing market, but also remember the housing market itself takes some time to respond and adjust. I think if there is that period of exuberance and fear of missing out, as it were, that tends to be a short period after the rate increases, and then that kind of levels off. You know, what do I see happening as a more probable outcome? The biggest thing I see is that even as demand goes down for housing, the problem is we're so undersupplied, we still haven't hit that point where those market fundamentals change yet. So a lot of this depends on, do rates keep going up and how much do they go up? They've actually had a pause this week, so that's some good news there. But do they keep going up and this market gets even more and more divergent between renting and buying? That would be problematic, right? Because that would mean we'd reach a point where something has to give. But if those rents level out, I definitely see us seeing a leveling out of prices or slower price appreciation. I don't think the spring that we've had can be replicated all year long, nor do I think it will be. I think there are a number of buyers who will, given the limited supply, they'll say, you know, we're going to let somebody else buy a house now. The problem is there's still 4 other people that want to buy that same house. So, you know, we might have had 25 offers on every house, and now we're seeing 4 offers on every house. That's still multiple bids on every house, or on most homes. I think you are going to see the market get easier for you. I don't think we're going to be talking about price reductions. At least I'm not seeing that in the next 6 months here. But again, a lot of that depends on if rates shoot through the roof. Now, of course, the irony is if rates shoot through the roof and you had waited to buy and you decide you want to buy then, even if you get a price reduction, you still can't afford the same house you could afford today, because the rates going up further will be far more of an effect than any modest price reduction. So, it's definitely some tricky waters to navigate. So, I do think that the Fed has a point with their analysis. I think that they're approaching this in largely the right way. I disagree with some of their choices on their analytics. I don't think consumers make choices quite the way that they think they do, but I think they're heading in the right direction. And I think their hope actually is that just talking about exuberant behavior might be a deterrent to exuberant behavior, right? If you were an investor saying, I'm gonna go all in and borrow a ton of money and buy a bunch of investment properties because it would go up 20% next year, right? That's irrational buying behavior. I think you might think twice about that if you read an article like this. And I think that's their hope is, if exuberance becomes this self-fulfilling prophecy where it feeds on itself, I think the Fed is hoping that the opposite is true, right? If we say something, we can actually prevent something bad from happening, right? We can prevent things from getting out of control. So that's my speech on what I think the Fed is saying and why, and whether I agree with it or not. Let's go through the rest of this. Again, incomes needed to qualify. We're right around 120. Our absorption rate, these still do remain strong, meaning buyers are still snapping up what is coming on the market. Like, we're not seeing these numbers slip in an appreciable way. What does this tell me? It tells me we don't have enough houses to sell for people who want to buy them. If we look at our total inventory, this is a number that isn't great, right? Like, we crested, we're starting to fall a little bit on our condo inventory, and our entry-level single-family home inventory pretty much has gotten to the point it was at last year, but last year it was starting to rise up, and this looks like it's flattening out. So I'm very curious to see what's going to happen with that. I think these rising rates are really kind of putting the kibosh on move-up buyers, right? People are saying, with these rates, I'm just going to stay put. And that reduced supply is further bolstering the prices, right? With demand, if demand drops 50%, but supply drops 90%, you have a more competitive market, even though demand has dropped. Our 14-day still active percentage, these numbers are still fairly low in this range. I don't see any warning signs here. If you watch our regular video, days on market is not increasing on average, at least. And if you look at our week supply of homes, what do we see? The condo market is still deteriorating. We did a little bit better here, but I mean, we're still under 3 weeks of inventory for our entry-level single-family homes. We're right around 3 weeks. So, here's my advice to you if you're a buyer. Here's the great news that you're facing today. You're not going to have as many people that you are bidding against on houses. I think this is good news. I think that means that your mentality should shift from, I want to buy whatever house I can get an offer accepted on in an area that works for me, to, I want to actually buy something that really makes sense for me, that has flexibility and really is kind of a long-term great decision. I think that's the kind of thing, that's the shift in the decision-making that I'd be making as a buyer. So thank you guys for watching. I'm almost out of breath. This was a long one. I appreciate it. We're just kind of jotting some numbers down. I was kind of curious how kind of some of the Fed's assertions work out in our market. Questions, comments, obviously we love those. If you'd like, there is a link down below for a no cost, no obligation 15-minute consultation. Click that link and you can set something up. Of course, you can always reach out to us through email as well, or messaging. We love all of that. Definitely do that if that is your preferred method of communication. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. And yeah, thanks so much for watching. We'll see you again real soon.